All right. Okay. Cool. So I guess I'm on.
Yes.
All right. So yeah, thanks for everybody's patience. My name is Jared Folkins, and I guess how do we want to like handle one housekeeping thing? How do we want to handle questions or something? Let me see here. If I can QA. I've got a QA board in Zoom.
From the audience, if everyone has any questions, I can relay those on to you.
Cool. All right, let's do it that way. Okay, so I gave this talk at B-Sides Boise and did a lightning talk over at B-Sides Portland. But some stuff that I've been exploring is deception techniques and just kind of reevaluating their value for kind of 2019 and 2020. This is my intro. I've done stuff. I try to encourage people that you can do stuff too. You can help people with your knowledge. You can, if you code, you can code. If you hack, you can hack. But I think everybody can teach. And so instead of giving a laundry list of everything I've done, I just try to approach it from the encouragement side. So these are the goals. We're gonna learn from history. We're going to try to apply and create and do an experiment. We'll see how that goes given the time. And then we're going to try to inspire folks to give back, to get involved, to think about building something and to think about teaching someone. Real quick, another housekeeping thing. Let me just get my notes on my side up so I don't blow this. Okay. Cool. Okay. So yeah, when you go back through history, I think something that takes place in like information security is that people always look for the new hotness and they don't go back in time, even in computer science, and try to learn from things. We kind of see this if you're old school, you kind of grew up with bare metal and then in the 90s and then this virtualization stuff. But there was a segment in there where you've got like BSD jails and stuff, and nobody really pays attention to that, or Solaris zones really. And then all of a sudden Docker containers are what it's all about. And so everybody thinks it's new, but if you go back, these primitives are there. And so in some of my research, I go through old history books to just try to see how people think, and not to make it stylish or whatever, but just to genuinely learn. And so in this history book, there's an old school battle of Luttra. I don't know if anybody's heard of that, but everybody's seen, I'm assuming, the movie 300. And I can't hear anybody. I'm assuming I'm muted. So just to let you know, unless you speak up. Cool.
Got you on mute.
Yep.
We're on mute, so we don't.
It's all good. Yep. Sounds good. So anyway, in the battle, in that movie 300, right, the Spartans are badass. They take, historically just that little nugget, and then Hollywood does its thing. But yeah, there's just a tiny force against this huge army, Persians, and they kick ass. But in this battle, the Battle of Leuctra, what's interesting is that it's around Greece as far as where it's located, and the Spartans are the aggressors in this case, and the Thebans and their allies are kind of on the defensive. And so when you research this is my favorite battle. When you take a look at it, the Spartans come in and they're strutting, right? They're flexing. They know they're badass. And so what they do is they take their phalanxes, their regiments, right? And they line up on the battlefield like they always do. And they're ready to crush. But the Thebans take a look at this and they think differently. And I try to inspire, students, especially given my background, I try to inspire them to think differently. Pieces of hacking, pieces of, ways of doing that. You got to think around the problem. You got to think in multiple dimensions. And so they realize that the Spartans, when the Spartans always put their best warriors on their right. Okay, this is the honor guard. They're awesome. They're elite. They're the highest paid troops. And so the Thebans decide that they're going to not approach the battlefield in the same way. They're on their right. They're going to stack their troops very weakly, but against the Spartans on their best side, on their left, they build a massive phalanx, and it's 50 soldiers deep. And I like to say it's one of the original smash the stack attacks, right? It's a buffer overflow. They charge into the Spartan line, and as soon as they crush the best troops, they pivot into, they flank into the remaining phalanxes, and they drive them from the field. And from the blue team perspective, given my background with both red teaming and blue teaming, I look at the blue team stuff and I say, like, this is exactly, how you get owned. And it definitely breeds like the motto, it only takes one vulnerability. It only takes one thing and that an attacker owns, and then we're screwed, and then our life sucks and everything's horrible. And I think that's a little contrived in this. I don't think it takes into account a lot of the assets we have available to us. And so I also think, like, a lot of people on the blue team side, or even on the red team side, right? Sales, marketing, they come to you and they ask, how quickly can you implement something? And you implement it, and you're never really given an opportunity in that spec or in that work, a document of work, statement of work, to actually harden. Right? There's no light items many times to harden, and then you're moved on into something else. But when you start to learn from history, an intriguing thing coming out of this battle is that King Philip II of Macedon, he observed this battle, right? And not many people seem to know who he is anymore. But he took the tactics that he saw in this battle, and he realized many things, and he built an amazing army and started down this idea of tactics and strategy, not just making your troops the best, but actually trying to pick advantageous positions or outthink your enemy. But where it really comes into fruition is that King Philip, his son Alex, who later becomes Alexander the Great, takes this army and just goes next level and essentially conquers the known world at the time. So moving forward kind of in history, I'll ask, who has read this book? And I'll wait until it's unmuted or you're back. Anybody? No? Yes? Uh-oh.
Yeah, you're on mute.
Cool.
We got you muted here. Just kind of
Yep. All right.
keep the noise down on the stream.
Yep. So yeah, this book, if you haven't read it, it's an amazing book. Lockheed Martin, Skunk Works, all the awesome tech, in jet airplane, it comes out of this, right? And Ben Rich is the man. He talks about this. But why I like to, again, dive into this story is because I don't know if many people realize that Dennis Overholser and Bill Schroeder, they actually took a look at trying to create stealth technology. And a lot of people were getting stuck by this problem, the idea of stealth, right? To minimize or marginalize or shrink down a radar signature. And so the intriguing thing, again, is to apply history to modern problems. Dennis and Bill had a similar hobby, and they would go back through old mathematical papers that were dropped by the Russian universities. And they found one. It was called The Method of Edge Waves and the Physical Theory of Diffraction by Peter Eufemstev. Say that 10 times fast. But anyway, like in these equations, Eufemstev, like that he's developed, he's made it possible that you can calculate the reflection of radio waves off of hard surfaces. You can predict. And this really starts to crack the egg of like stealth. Right? Before, they were used to trying to think in curves and shapes, and they didn't have supercomputers. So how are they going to calc this with, like, slide rules, or even, the era of computers, not even close to doing it. And they realized that with this paper, what if they made a plane that was, hundreds and hundreds of flat panels, and they calculated the signature for every panel. And that's obviously exactly what they do. And this process later becomes known as faceting. But again, I'm kind of structuring around the idea that to go back in time, to read through papers, even 10-year-old papers, there is value in this. There's immense value. So kind of going into some of my ideas, I created an experiment, and this is called der-foo. You can find it at der-foo.com. And der-foo was pretty simple. I created an experiment where I wrote an application that allows you to create a directory for your users, but it just removes the email addresses from the public internet. And there's all sorts of like, I would say, academic reasons that you wouldn't want to hide email addresses. But in the modern era of attack surfaces, right, simply hiding email addresses, removing them from your public internet, like it drove down our drive-by phishing attacks to almost zero. Like they're very calculated when we see them come through, and so that means like our incident response time goes up. We understand that if it's a phishing campaign, it's probably targeted, or somebody's at least crafting something to try to get to us or our users. But it does this in a very unique way. But you can check it out. But again, I'm trying to iterate, like, research stuff, experiment with ideas. There's the academic side that says maybe hiding emails is stupid, and that's not the way that email was designed to be. But there's the practical side of what you're suffering if you're the blue team, or trying to make it harder than a couple line bash script to just pull down all the email addresses of your staff. Okay, just a reminder, this book, The Cuckoo's Egg, right? Classic. If you haven't read this, I highly encourage you to read it. But essentially, Cliff Stoll, right? He was this dude who was going to school for astronomy, really stoked to be doing this, but he needed to pay the bills. So he did what any person does. They think, I'm going to become a sysadmin to pay the bills. And that was the first mistake. No, I'm kidding. But yeah, he's trying to pay his bills by being a sysadmin. And so for students or younger people in the room, back in the day, you had these things called mainframes. They're big computers. And if you were, say, a professor that was wanting to do a calculation, you would purchase compute time. If this story sounds familiar, it's because we've labeled this the cloud and called it AWS, and we have a billing model around it now, and it's somebody else's computer in the cloud over in Virginia or wherever their data center is. And so if you can think of it like that too, it's kind of remarkable. Like, I know in working with my cloud infrastructure, I always have an amount that I can't account for, right? So like, I look at the bill and I'm like, oh, it's $1.15, and I have no idea where that came from, that charge, and I don't have the time, and it's not worth my time for this account. Don't even worry about it. But in this book, Phil's boss comes to him and says, hey, I can account for all the CPU time that was utilized on our mainframe computer, except for 75 cents worth. And so, so Cliff, being like the practical kind of inquisitive person that he was, he dives into that system, and he realizes that 9 seconds of CPU time is missing, right? 9 seconds, which is pretty remarkable. I feel that somebody actually wants to maintain their systems to that degree. And so as he looks into things, he recognizes that he's been hacked. And this is before, like, hacking is a thing. The idea of espionage, this is pre all that stuff. They're still developing the language to kind of articulate what's taking place. And so, like any sysadmin, Cliff is tempted to just roll creds, rebuild the stack, and move on with life. But like many of us know, like, when somebody has owned you, ideally you want to understand what they took, who they are, what their motives were, what they're still after, if they're coming back, if they're entrenched and have effectively pivoted to something else. And so he designs this idea, right, where in between the data line coming in and the mainframe computer, he, man in the middle, is his own device and taps it and puts a teleprinter on there. And so nowadays we've got Logstash, a log server, some log host that's logging it. They didn't have that back then. So he built this physical log host right in the middle of the stack. And as the attacker started to continue to attack or dive into stuff, it would print out the commands that this user was using. And so he could start to investigate what was going on, what was this person after. And so a couple critical keywords from the story. He realized the attacker was searching for words like nuclear, and they were also after this thing, whatever it was, an acronym SDI. And so Cliff gets the idea, I'm going to create a fake account. I'm going to call it SDINet. And I'm going to fill this account with fake documents, fake bureaucracy, and hell, I'm going to put a fake office manager in here, fake secretary, to figure out, to like really sell the idea that there's something here. And the next time the attacker came in, they searched again, and it totally worked. They started investigating this account. They were highly intrigued by this content. And so, long story short, this leads to this hacker named Marcus Hess, right? Selling secrets to the KGB, right? And it's one of the first documented cases that I can find of, cyber espionage, as well as a honeypot or a canary, right? This really starts to build this idea of deception techniques. And I think something that's often overlooked is, if you've seen that movie Inception, which I think many have, right? When they get to the dream world starts to be controlled by the operator, and they can shift the landscape, shift buildings, all that stuff. And I think a lot of times I see people think, if I get hacked once, I'm screwed. And they don't realize that once they're hacked, somebody is on your turf. And if you invest in shaping the world, shaping the reality with which that attacker exists, you can, slow them down considerably. And in a lot of cases, if it's just ransomware and stuff, people that, are owning you on the periphery and then handing that work off to their operator like a business, there's a lot of noise that happens on your network because of that. And so this, again, starts to articulate that value. So that leads me to talking about honeypots. Honeypots, Tracking Hackers, Lance Spitzner. This book is, I think, 02, 03. And I just want to briefly go over what this is on your network, right? This is the only diagram we're going to show. The cloud, the internet, your firewall, which looks awesome, like a 286 with a CRT. I really enjoy that. So that you've got your web servers, your mail server, and then you've got a server that you've actually structured to look legitimate, but it's a honeypot. And the value here, right, is that being in your DMZ, which is on, again, the edge of your network. When somebody owns something on the edge of your network, they're going to try to pivot. And when they pivot, they're going to make, hopefully they're going to make noise. And in the same way on the desktop, right? Desktop, there's two there. And then there's a third desktop, but that one's also set up like a honeypot. It's got a fake account on it, like that SDI net. And as an attacker tries to pivot into that one, that desktop, they're going to set something off. And this book, I think, also kind of goes into the idea of services, right, as honeypots: FTP, Telnet, SSH, HTTP, and then it defines like honeypots. There's three types. There's low interaction, which is usually no access to the OS, small sockets spinning, simple handshakes, right? Medium interaction, right? Very limited operating system functionality, if any, but they're trying really hard to emulate a legitimate service. And they want to do that because they want to engage the attacker longer, right? So SDINet, going back to this book, by making it believable, you are engaging the attacker. And by keeping the attacker engaged, you can actually, it's easier to track them. It's easier to see what's going on. And then high interaction honeypots, there are research projects around this that are massive, right? And I think that's where high interaction generally plays in, is that you've got OS level access. You've got full services, OpenSSH or some FTP stack or Apache or whatever, functionally spun up to be legitimate and to be vulnerable in many cases, because many of these research honey nets, which is worldwide, a worldwide collection of honeypots, are trying to capture malware, trying to understand what that malware does. Again, like Marcus Hess, trying to understand what the attackers are after, how they would try to pivot into someone's infrastructure. And then this is an awesome paper, 2016, a survey on honeypot software and data analysis. So it really starts to define more production honeypots versus research honeypots, right? My area, as I'm shaping this conversation, I'm more interested in production from either red team or blue team. Red team trying to hack, but also equip the blue team because they're on the same team to do better. And then blue teamers to understand that this technology, though it seems simple, it can definitely be utilized to protect them. And so I focus on the production honeypots versus the research honeypots. Honey nets is what I was describing. Some interesting projects from this: Honeyspot, a wireless honeypot. Honeypot camera, right, emulating a open webcam. Honey Droid, obviously that's really creative, an Android-based honeypot. Honey D is a really well-known one, but I think all sorts of stuff that you can do with it. But I think 2007 was like the last time I saw that one being worked on. Honey Trap is probably my favorite, and it's what some of my project is based off of, both in code and in idea. Honey Trap, though, is a research honeypot, and you can go check that one out. I found it highly valuable. I think the project's awesome, but for where I was headed to help the blue team, I didn't see it as being super practical, and also development is kind of slowing on that one. And then I think the other commercial product, right? Canary.tools, right? I'll plug those guys. They're super cool. Those guys are really nice. And they issue that Canary tokens, which we can go into in a little bit, canarytokens.org. That's also in this paper, but I want to say there's like 70 or 80 different projects, and I think it's valuable to go through the paper yourself if you're interested in kind of sharing this information. So that leads me to my project, right? Kusaka.org. I named it. There's an Indian tribe, Tinglet people, and they have this old legend that this mystical otter would try to lure you into its domain with like cries of a baby or of a woman, and then it would like change its shape and then take your soul. And so I named it after that, because I thought, canaries, I want them to emulate just enough real services to keep attackers on the line as long as possible. But I also wanted to systematize a lot of this. What I saw lacking was in many things, a very simple and elegant solution that was easy to get installed, easy to maintain, because again, back to my first story, when you have sales or leadership coming at you over and over, I know the pain of trying to maintain something over years and years and years, and maybe not having the resources or having that buy-in. So I wanted it simple to install, simple to maintain, and really get like high value as quick as possible out of it. So let's see if I can do this here. Demo time. All right. I'm assuming you can still hear me and that I'm muted. So let's see.
Yes.
Cool. Since I blew some time, where are we at? What would you like me to do, Phil? I can go into demoing this and kind of talking some more. Or?
Sure, we're good.
Cool. Okay. Yeah, you can see there. So yeah. Let me just see if I can share my desktop. Share screen. Can you see my desktop?
Yes.
Cool. Let me know if I leak any keys, please. All right. So I built this project in Go. There's a lot of reasons for this. I've done a lot of development, and I've had a career that's almost 20 years old now in technology. And so I made it look hot and sexy because I've been in the room where I've had functional technology that is not snake oil, that is not a blinky light, but that doesn't get utilized, right? And somebody comes in with a sales team with a really fancy presentation, and it gets sold. And I'm told to implement it, but I can already tell many times, like, this isn't going to help anybody. And so if you've been there, I'm just assuming you're raising your hand or nodding your heads. It's a pretty common story. And so this is open source. It's Apache licensed. Something you can help me do is start the project to try to get some eyeballs on it. And I haven't tried to push it too much yet to the blue team like forums, but if you think of somebody that I can kind of show this to, that would be great. In this quick demo, I'm just going to do it all locally to try to prevent any epic fails, and we'll see how it goes. Okay, so this the dashboard, the single binary primitive of Go is really powerful, and I think it's overlooked by a lot of people on what you can do. We're starting to see this in the red team side because there's a lot of tools where you can ship almost a full, you can, like a command and control instance with a single binary, right? So you can think of the single binary primitive almost like a Docker container. It might be a way to kind of think about that. And so with this single binary, it acts as both the dashboard when you're running into like aggregator mode, but it also acts as a sensor too. So when you put it, when you SEP that same binary from the releases, yeah, I'll go through this real quick. Like, so theoretically, you just have to create services of any of these, run them in the right mode based on the documentation, and you can get them in sensor mode, or you can run them in the aggregator mode, which is the default, on any standard host, right? And so already this is taking the work of one person and really helping me like forklift this idea, right? If I had to do this all myself and compile it cross-platform for everything, I can get lost really quick. But I can compile this cross-platform just from my desktop, right? I run a single command, it ships this all up. This is really powerful. And so what I'll do real quick is, there's these ideas of teams in here that comes the default team. Teams get alerts, so right, I can go here. There's my email address. Hopefully nobody tries to own it. Okay. Whatever. And so you can create teams to actually get alerts. So when you go here and do tokens, you can say my DevOps team East Coast, right, is gonna get this, and I can have a single aggregator, but I can actually help many people with that, and I can alert to many people. And so here for now, this is all I've got done. You can create a link, right? The idea behind this link is that you could put this in a web page internally and, call it something. You could put this in Slack and change it to look like a link elsewhere, right? You can disguise it, but when somebody hits it, you start to get an alert, right? And so this is valuable. And on the receiving end of this token alert, I've just gotten an email, right? If I've got SMTP configured, which you can do here, which I am not going to go into because I don't want to lose those keys. And so, yeah, that's pretty powerful. But one of my favorite, like what I'm driving towards truly with this is this idea of sensors. And I'll create one really quick just to show you the workflow and go through it. This sensor has nothing added to it yet. It does have its own automatically generated API key. I would use that later. I have staged this test one. And I wanted to kind of walk through my thoughts on that. So let's see. I'm going to open, hopefully, I don't want to show my environment variables. So let's see if this works. Oops, we don't want to do that. We want to do this. Please do it now. No. Okay, we can fix this. In development mode, Kusaka operates, oops, damn it. And off an environment variable. This should actually, cross your fingers, demo gods, woohoo! We have a listener. So let's do telnet, localhost. I put this on port 222 just for fun. Yay. And again, oops, come back to our dashboard and we've got an alert, right? And this is fired, right? And it says simulated, so this would be like a medium level one. There's nothing happening at the file system, right? But to the attacker, and where I'm headed with just the telnet sensor alone is to add options to have a header, a banner that looks like an old school banner that actually when you nmap it would give that signature, right? So in your nmap scan, you're like, oh, this is this product and it's vulnerable. Automatically closes the connection to try to save resources, but these are all options I'll eventually try to get to set. So an intriguing thing here though is you can have multiple services on it. So for now, I've been working really hard on this stuff. And what, actually, did I do a clone? I didn't. Cool. Let's do, I know this one, thecrowd.com, was that it? Yeah, okay. So this actually clones a site, including the HTTP headers. It tries to remove some so that it doesn't try to get you into a loop, a redirect loop or something crazy. Again, I'm working on the UI. We'll wait until this completes. I probably shouldn't. The depth is essentially how deep do you want it to go, right? If it's a big site, like I've used this on some of my production sites with, 15,000 different assets, right? The depth of 3 really starts to snag all that content. I bet you it is working. Yeah, it's still going. Cool. So all these assets it's grabbing, it's trying to detect, if it's got fully qualified domain names, it's going to splice in its own. So it's doing a lot of work. Okay, so there's ThugCrowd's site. There's our test sensor. Oops, HTTP. In this case, we're gonna, so here, if you had a DNS entry, an A record, or a IPv6 A record, that's what you would put here. Obviously, this is all local. And again, if you had something set up on 443 or port 80, you would tell that. Here, I don't think it's running with that correct permissions. So I'm going to submit this. So what happened is I submitted it. This is the sensor window running in sensor mode. It grabbed a new configuration and spun up the services automatically. So now as I go to localhost 3333, boom, right? So the power here, the primitive here is you've taken a website and you've almost weaponized it in a defensive technique, but it gave it its own fingerprint, right? And that is something that these honeypots and canaries really struggle with, is allowing somebody with very little time, under budget, who's always on the run, to like spin something up with a unique fingerprint and to have it manage itself, right? And so that's kind of the direction where things are going with this stuff. Eventually, I'm going to try to go through most of the services, SSH, VNC. RDP is a really popular one. Someday that'll be a beast. I don't know. I'll have to like reverse. I don't know if you all seen Marcus online kind of creating an RDP honeypot, but yeah, it's a project in of itself to try to go through all that stuff. But something intriguing is that when I did this for both B-Sides Boise in Idaho and B-Sides PDX in Portland, I cloned, I don't know if anybody saw my tweets, I cloned B-Sides PDX website and created a honeypot, a canary with Kusaka on the public internet, and I announced it, right? And I'll have to try to find the tweets, but not only were people intrigued, right? There was 1,200 and some odd events, and there is a back off. Like I was lucky that I thought about putting this on the public internet and then DOSing my inbox, right? I made a back off function so that you don't totally get owned if you decide to do that with a bunch of alerts. But it was intriguing to see that, as well as somebody started to hack it. Somebody was feeding it different signatures, different HTTP signatures, trying to figure out if it was running PHP, or trying to send it different byte signatures and different headers, right? To try to figure out if it was vulnerable to some Apache structs thing. I don't know what it was trying to do. But you could already see people were intrigued by it. I did the same thing with ThugCrowd. And so I don't know. That's kind of where it's going. The last thing I will say is that the HTTPS stuff is really cool. And I worked really hard on that story because I know what a pain that is for anybody to manage this. And I'm kind of nervous on what's there. I'll just go to it. Cool. So yeah, being local, I don't think I can really show this to you. I should have had a different server set up. But what you can do here is that, again, if you have an A record pointed to an instance of this in the cloud. So you, for $5 a month, go to DigitalOcean or get some virtual instance in the cloud, point a domain name to it, whatever you want, and point an A record at it, and then input that A record here. So if I were to go like, I think my public one, that's down a moment, is test 3. But anyway, if I put test 3 in here, Kusaka, this will fail. But if it were to succeed, you click the reboot button. It grabs the cert. It installs the cert. It boots the service, reboots the service, but keeps the same PID. It installs the cert so that like now it's functional. It will redirect you if you use port 80 to 443. And I'm trying to figure out what else there is to it. but yeah, oh yeah, it'll manage it, right? So now this is using Let's Encrypt, so you won't have to think about the cert any longer. So again, taking the burden off of the blue team to manage and saying that the software should make it simple, right? And this is inspired. I'll give a shout out to, this is the library it's using, Cert Magic. Matt Holt is my buddy. I've hung out with Matt. He is a wonderful human being. But underneath the hood, Cert Magic manages this certificate, and it's using another library underneath it. It needs a plug too. It's called Lego in the Go world. But ultimately, we can take these and not only do the HTTP challenge, which is what I've got right now. We can eventually get the other challenges on there. And I'm kind of thinking about, for some of the HTTPS stuff that I'm doing on the sensors, it would be nice to be able to get certs with a DNS challenge and then ship the cert off to a sensor. So the sensor's got an HTTPS cert too for fun. So yeah, I'll go back to wherever I was. Okay, yeah. So I'll finish up this real quick with after. So anybody, if you remember this, I'll assume you do. This is an old show, Robert Stack, back in the late 80s, 90s, and unsolved mysteries, right? So when folks don't think that this stuff works, right? This isn't a reenactment. I can't show the photos yet, but just this last weekend, there was an alleged incident, right? And if you went to the office to find what was going on, you would see an office like this. And on a shelf, there was a box with a bunch of gear. And people that I've trusted and asked for their opinion can vet that this is true. But I'm giving you the idea that this technology works, right? When you change the landscape, when you deceive the attacker, and you start to throw these left hooks in there, this stuff will help you detect stuff. And in my what I focus on, education, in where I'm employed, this actually means something incredibly powerful. One of the things that I didn't realize is that because this was detected, and allegedly, if this is a student, right, what does this mean for the student? Before the student thinks they have full reign over an infrastructure and can scan and do whatever they want, now you're catching that student early. And something that I believe in is in education, and not everybody's like this, but I really appreciate people that are soft landings for students when it's their first time making a mistake. Being able to intercede, get in front of that student, say, hey, you're curious, I've been there, I love this, but this is going to cost you big time. Like, without the investment, in education, where this leads is that a student is curious, they have the lay of the land, they go deeper and deeper and deeper. Finally, they break something big, they cross some big boundaries, and all of a sudden, law enforcement is required to be involved, and federal law enforcement can be involved, and that can shape the future of that child. And so there's my story there. So yeah, I wanted to inspire folks, right? Again, I started it all off saying, this is who I am. I do stuff. You can do stuff too. You don't have to have this most amazing resume. I don't feel my resume is that amazing. And yet you can help. You can help people. And so there's two stories that I wanted to go into to end this up. Let me get to my notes here to make sure I'm on time. Or I guess I'm totally not on time. Yeah, so back in high school, I was in this punk rock band with my brother, right? And we played a ton of shows, and he was pretty young when we started. He's a drummer, and he was 15 at the time. And from a very early age, somebody that I aligned with about helping people was my brother. We were always on the same page, and he thought, man, this rock and roll stuff's awesome. It's super fun. I like having something to do. I like being able to create and make something, but it'd be nice if it meant something. And he had this goal where he always talked about, if I can just help, one kid in the back who doesn't feel left out like I felt left out at times, if I can include them in that circle, maybe it'll mean something, right? And so he spoke about this to me a lot. And there was this kid. This kid his name's Nate, 8th grader. Would come to, I'm not kidding you, almost every show, hundreds of shows. This kid always came. And as you got to know this kid, you understood his home life. You understood that he was looking for a community. You understood that maybe it wasn't always comfortable to go home. And so my brother always, when we got done with the set, would call this kid up and say, hey, Nate, come help me with my gear, or hey, like hang out and talk to me, or let's run this booth or whatever. Right. And then we lost track of him at a high school. And then right after that, my brother passed away. Right. He died at 21. And so we had to put this memorial on. If you ever had to go through something like that, not an easy thing to do by any means. And this person walked up to me and they gave me a big hug. And I realized it was this grown kid named Nate, right? Telling me that he joined like the Navy and he's trying to straighten his life out. But he saw my brother's name, out of all things, in the paper, in the memorial section, right? And knew he had to come down and just tell me that he was so thankful to my brother for investing in him all those years ago. And so an intriguing thing about Nate, if you go to Instagram.com/photonate, you'll see a world-renowned photographer. And I think that's pretty incredible. Not that that's anybody's credit but Nate's. But kind of leading into my last story, this punk rock thing, right? We had a demo CD, and my best friend, he made money during the summers by being a camp counselor at the time. And he goes to this camp, right? And he calls me up maybe like a week after he gets there. And he's like, you're not going to believe this, but I got this kid who loves your album. And I'm like, well, that's great. That's wonderful to hear. He's like, no, man, he loves it. He's like singing to it every night. This little kid, he loves it. I said, okay, well, give it to him. I'll just give you one. It doesn't matter. And he's like, no, he kind of plays guitar. Would you call him up and like teach him his favorite song? And I'm like, oh, okay, yeah. So I called this kid up, spent an hour with him, and just taught him his favorite song off of the CD. And I did not think anything of it, right? But if you can guess, which you won't, this kid's name, his name is Jason A. Donenfeld. You might know him as a premier security researcher, and you might know him as the mad scientist behind WireGuard, right? And so, again, not taking credit for Jason's work. Jason has done remarkable things. But my challenge when I go to speak and when I try to help people is that I don't know at times what good it does. It's hard to see in the moment if anything you're doing is good. But as I think of my brother and I think about these things, I kind of feel like if we started to measure these things in decades, right? Helping people, helping projects, helping students, measure those in decades rather than days, that I'm pretty hopeful like what the stories would be in 10 or 20 years. And so anyway, I hope you enjoyed this talk. That's it for everything I got. If you got questions, yeah, I'll take them now.
I do have a question. Are you working on an SSH protocol for your project?
Yep. Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. So I don't know how many coders there are in the room, but like things are starting to groove where I invested a lot of time, about 9 months, trying to figure out some of the patterns of how this is all going to work. And now all these hooks are in place. So it's starting to like that reboot functionality of the sensor. I shipped that last night. Like I knew what that looked like, but I just had to get the project to a point where the sensor could not only get its config, but send the correct signals and reboot and all that stuff internally because I had an idea of what I wanted. So long answer, but yeah, SSH, I think BNC is next. And then I don't know from there, probably SNMP or something.
Anyone else? Well, no more questions here.
Cool. I really appreciate it. Yeah.
Yeah, we appreciate you presenting.
Sorry for the technical stuff, man.
No problem. It was what was really made it weird too is one of the other people online's name was Jared as well. So therefore it looked like you're on when you weren't on. And
right on. Well, with that, I'll leave you to your evening. I appreciate it.
Thanks.
All right. Yep.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.